Welcome to the Love is Our Nature podcast, where we discuss all things ranging from love, relationships, authenticity, fulfillment, to lessons from plant medicine journeys, inner healing, and living your truth. I'm not your teacher, I'm only your fellow student. Occasionally, you also get to hear some of my own healing process and journey back to love. The point of the program? That you take away at least one actionable piece of knowledge that supports you in expanding whatever aspect of your life your heart most desires. My name is Cesar Rodriguez. I will be your host, and I am honored to have you here. Happy listening. Hello, welcome to the Love is Our Nature podcast. I'm so pumped. I am genuinely just so inspired and lit up to have the guest I have with me today. He is a new, really great friend of mine, and his name is Darren Austin Hall. Let me tell you a little bit about Darren Austin Hall. Darren is a modern-day druid. He teaches sound healing and works as a sacred musician, traveling the world performing his signature sound journey concerts. Darren has also developed a training called Source Resonance, where he trains people in the sound healing and the sacred path of music. He also leads men's work and has developed an archetypal course taking men through empowerment called Heroic Consciousness. Darren also just released his new double album, Honor All Creation, which is devoted to awakening a sacred sense of the earth as a living goddess. And he will soon be launching an online companion course for it. Darren, thank you so much for being with us, and welcome to the Love is Our Nature podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Cesar. So excited and pumped to be here, man.
Yeah, for sure, man. I just so appreciate you dropping by, spreading your love here with people. You're somebody that, in my opinion, really embodies a lot of the teachings that I have newly come into contact with. You know, like and we could do a 6-hour episode, right? But we're gonna keep this. We're gonna keep this an hour for now. Maybe we end up doing a part 2 at some point. But I'm just so excited to dive in. So Darren, that was such a packed intro. There's so much in there. Tell us a little bit more about your story. What is a druid for those like myself that hadn't ever heard that word before? And tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Yeah, well, the term druid is definitely, I think it goes over some people's heads, but the best way to describe a druid is if anyone's seen Lord of the Rings, you know, Gandalf is kind of this wizard philosopher figure. And the druids were actually these ancient kind of philosopher, leaders, men and women from the Celtic culture, which is like ancient Britannia. And I've been on a work for the last 10 years of my life, like reclaiming my own European indigenous ancestry, which has been quite a journey and adventure. And I just came across the druids at one point. And the more I studied about the druids, the more I started to see that my life was kind of following a similar path, because apparently in this ancient world where the druids existed, they were actually 3 things. They were a bard, which is like the sacred musician, the keeper of the oral teachings, because at the time they were an oral culture. And then you had the Ove, which is like the healer who would study all the different plant medicines and such and naturopathic healing methods. And then eventually the druid, which is like the philosopher, the spiritual teacher. And the druid would be the integration of all those aspects. So I just look at my life, and I've always been involved in so many different things. But I work with an astrologer every year. She's just been such a force in my life. And she's always told me, Darren, you have to stick to 3 things. So when I found the druids, I actually have this druid tattoo here. So there's like the 3 rays of what they call the Awen, this divine inspiration. So
nice. So
it's just kind of stuck. And, you know, I have some friends who have been trained in druidry, and they say I am literally like a druid. So I have no actual official training in it. I've just self-studied.
Nice, nice. And you're a sound healer. So
Yes.
tell us about how does one apply for a job as a sound healer? You know?
Well, in our present amazing world, with the healing arts becoming so popular and mainstream, um, you can pretty much like really explore so many different fields of healing. And sound healing just seems to be one of those ones that's really growing right now, really
Hmm.
fast. I mean,
Hmm.
I've been in the field like officially about 12 or 13 years now. And, one of the most popular offerings that some people may be aware of is this thing called a sound bath,
Hmm.
where typically people are playing like these healing instruments like crystal bowls. And when I was first starting, that was there. I was probably one of the only ones in Toronto where I'm from in Canada. And now
Hmm.
they're just everywhere.
Hmm.
So it's an ancient thing in the sense that sound and music, when you really delve into the study of it, has been used for healing for a very, very, very long time. And in some ways, it's one of the most original medicines on the planet.
Hmm.
And then in our present age, there's sort of this revitalization of that because we seem to have lost that knowledge for a certain period of time. And now it's being really rebirthed, reclaimed in a very powerful way, to the point where you have a lot of even mainstream musicians now getting into using, their music for healing. And inherently music is healing. I mean, if you had it, when I talk to people and take them through my trainings and my workshops, it's like I get people to reflect on like a favorite musical moment in their life, whether they're seeing an artist they really admired live, or something that happened to them when they were directly making music. And it usually is like a spiritual experience that they're describing, which is
Hmm.
really profound. Like a lot of big meaning happens. It's like a peak moment, life-changing memory that lasts a lifetime kind of thing.
Yeah. And how did you get into sound healing?
Well, you know the story. I've told it a few times to the workshops you've attended.
Yes.
It's a bit of an odyssey, so I'll try and keep it in a brief synopsis. But
Hmm.
I mean, I found myself I guess it was my late 20s time. I'm 41 now, but in my late 20s, I was studying Chinese medicine formally in Toronto at a school. And as much as I love Chinese medicine, and this school was great because I was also able to study with a lot of indigenous elders. They had a huge network of shamans that they're working with as well. So I really got this amazing overview of the healing arts. But the Chinese medicine aspect, which was what I was specializing in, I never felt completely like it was my destiny. Like I loved it to an extent. And it
Hmm.
was really just I saw an astrologer rather just kind of coincidentally,
Hmm.
um, and she, if anyone's seen a very good astrologer, why there's such legendary hype around astrology. It truly is an ancient science, to the point where Hippocrates, the father of ancient Greek medicine, said, any practice of medicine without astrology is like blasphemy, just to give you
Hmm.
context. And this astrologer said that, yeah, Chinese medicine wasn't my path. And she looked at my chart and she said, well, you really should be working with sound. Like you're a sound healer. And I was
Hmm.
like, what? What is that? I've never even heard of that before. But
Wow.
there was something that landed in me when she said those words, like a vibration that went off. And then she literally was just like, just Google it. Because I was like, where do I find that? Google it. And that Google search changed my life. I started researching and just discovering. I think the thing that drew me the most to sound healing is it's a field of healing where science and spirituality really get to converge, because it's all about vibration and energy. I mean, if you look at the nature of sound,
Mm.
it's just frequency and energy are synonymous. And we now know that we live in an energetic reality thanks to quantum physics. And so it just went from there. And then I started to reactivate. I
I want to
knew I
interrupt
did.
for a second
Oh,
and just
please.
say the because I've had the fortune of participating in two of your sound healing sessions and hear your story more in depth, and that's why I want you to share it with people. But I love when you shared about your experience when you went to Google it, and it was like I remember you saying that as you were consuming the information of what this whole thing was, there was a certain experience you were having in that moment. Can you say a bit about that too?
Um, you mean like it felt like I turned the ignition key on the Millennium Falcon and like
Yes.
warp speed? Yeah, I mean, I stayed up for 6 or 7 hours that night, just
Wow.
reading. And then what was interesting is that, when you study Chinese medicine, the depth of it is all about what they call nourishing destiny. And they say
Hmm.
when you start to walk your path of destiny, because they believe the universe is a guiding realm, that's what the Taoists call it. They say that the universe will start to present little signs to show you that you're on your path. And these are
Hmm.
often just called synchronicities or meaningful coincidences.
Or
So
omens, as Paulo
yeah,
Coelho calls them too,
omens.
right?
So it was like 3 days after I did that Google search, my friend invited me to go and see this guy. She described it as like, I think he plays like wine glasses with his fingers or something like that.
Yeah.
That sound. But it just happened to be this guy called David Hickey, who's very well known in Canada, and he was playing the crystal bowls. And
Mm.
it was my first experience of seeing one of these sound healing musicians playing a kind of celestial music. I mean, it wasn't for entertainment. He was playing these strange sounds on gongs and crystal bowls, but I found myself, I got very emotional. I was crying at one point because I just knew this is what I was
Mm.
supposed to do with my
It's one of
life.
those things where you just become so clear as what's meant for you or what your calling is, huh?
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. It
Mm.
was it was very, very profound. I'll never forget that moment. Absolutely.
That's amazing. I'm curious. Just but we're making a parenthesis here in your story, just because I'm so curious. What would you say if somebody said like, Darren, I haven't had a moment like that in my life. Like I don't know what my calling is. Like, what would you say to somebody to find that for themselves?
Mm, that's a good question, man. I mean, I feel like that's something that modern culture has really robbed people of because
Hmm.
I've been very blessed to do a lot of work with Indigenous peoples. And,
Hmm.
something that's really amazing about Indigenous peoples is that their cultures are so old. And with that oldness, there's a certain mastery of things that they've developed, which for the most part, our modern culture has completely and rather arrogantly just looked down upon. Like we haven't given the indigenous enough acknowledgement to really realize how brilliant their cultures are. And
Hmm.
something they figured out is they really figured out how to cultivate human beings and really good human beings. And one of the
Hmm.
ways they did that was that they would, the elders in particular, because their cultures were very elder rich. They really, as opposed to our cultures where we kind of put our old people away in homes, their elders really are kind of like the rulers, the leaders. And they observe the children, and they look at the children, they look for the things that we do as a child that's kind of eccentric because they believe that we come into this life already with skills, whether you believe in reincarnation or what, but our
Hmm.
souls already come with a medicine that we're supposed to provide to the world, to society. That's what they call it, the medicine.
Hmm.
And so they look to see where are the little glimmers of that medicine as a child, and then they will gently encourage that development throughout adolescence. And then, of course, the indigenous take adolescence through a very powerful initiation phase,
Hmm.
which breaks them, or rather transforms them into adulthood in this very graceful and powerful way, where they feel very responsible and noble, and they want to take care of their culture and their society, things that we're like really starving for. But speaking to someone who's come out of the culture that we've lived in, I always come back to like that Joseph Campbell quote, like follow your bliss,
Hmm.
and if there's anything that I've learned from the indigenous, it's like if you need time to figure your stuff out, like your purpose, go to nature. Like if someone came up to me and they're like, I have no idea what to do with my life,
Hmm.
I'd say, okay, go rent a cabin or go up to a cottage or go to a park even and just spend a couple hours with a journal and
Hmm.
just ask yourself, like, what do you really love to do? Like, what do you really love to do? To the point where, like, if you had to learn this thing and master it, which would take challenges such as learning a guitar, you love it so much that you're going to go through
Hmm.
all of those challenges. You're never going to stop doing it because you just love it so much.
Yes.
That's what people need to be doing. And a lot of people, unfortunately, are not doing what they love. And then
Hmm.
they get, live lives of quiet frustration.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that bit of wisdom about finding your purpose and whatnot. And there definitely is something about being immersed in nature that even I'm discovering for myself now, being 2 months in Costa Rica. You're uh, very
Oh yeah.
closely immersed with nature. And we'll talk about that in a moment, because one thing that I admire about you is your reverence for Earth,
Mm,
for
mhm,
Gaia.
mhm.
I actually have heard your entire double album, by the way, every single
Oh
song,
wow.
all 22
Wow.
songs.
All 3 hours just about. It's like a triple album in series.
Yeah. So I'll be asking you a bit about that as well.
Cool.
So take us back. So there you are. You did the Google search. You saw the wine glasses that were really singing bowls, right?
Yes.
And then what happened?
Well, then it just sort of hit me like I've got to get those bowls. So, and the thing about sound healing, unfortunately, is there's a bit of a financial barrier because it is expensive to, buy these tools. But the way I look
Hmm.
at it is if you're going to study medicine or something like that, like it's so expensive to do medical school.
Right.
And I also feel like if you're on your path of destiny, like the universe starts to provide,
Mm.
and there's always ways to call that in. So I got my hands on some crystal bowls a year later through the help of actually my grandmother. She
Mm.
actually lent me some money and I was able to purchase my first set of seven. I just dove in and got a seven chakra set
The whole thing.
and the whole thing. And I just started working with the bulls. I started to realize, as you've seen in the other workshops I've shared, like that as a child, I had this gift of channeling sounds and songs, which
Hmm.
I hadn't really appreciated enough
Hmm.
because I thought it was just a weird eccentric thing that I would sing myself to sleep every night for hours. I would go into these ecstatic states of expression. Music was something that came so effortlessly to me that when I was actually put in piano classes as a young child to learn music, I just hated it. I just wanted to
Hmm.
be in this free flowing expression.
Mm.
And so when I found the crystal bowls, that aspect of myself was brought online, especially working with another shamanic teacher, Dr. Bradford Keeney, who first sort of described to me what a shaman does. And he was working with African shamans at the time in the Kalahari Desert. And in their culture, they're called song catchers. They literally go into altered states of consciousness and catch what they call our spiritual songs from different spiritual beings in different dimensions.
Mm.
And I kind of asked him, I told him about what I was doing as a child. And he pretty much acknowledged, like, sounds like you have this gift, like the same sort of gift. And that sort of contextualized things in different ways. So then I started to get with the bulls, I started singing in this way that you can hear on some of my albums, especially my earlier albums like Songs of
Hmm.
Source, where I just sing this kind of wordless singing. And as weird as it might sound to make, sounds with your voice without words for an entire song or album, if you go back to the ancients, this was very much like a form of expression. They called it
Hmm.
speaking in tongues. It was very much just about using the voice as this instrument that's not necessarily about making lyrics,
Hmm.
although I write lyrics too. I love wordplay. But when you sing without lyrics, it tends to like access the heart, I find sometimes
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
a very profoundly different way and
That's
can
one of the
really put
questions
people
I
into
had.
those. Yeah. Yeah.
It could really put people to what?
Into more of a shamanic, like mystical state of consciousness, which
Yeah.
is what the sound journey is really all about. Like
Hmm.
I usually close with one of my lyrical guitar songs, like Oh My Goddess, which people love so much right now.
Hmm.
But that's more to grab people back in. But while the sound journey is going, the meat of it is mostly me just doing this kind of like shamanic style singing where
Hmm.
people really start to like get into these like very altered and enhanced states of consciousness that are quite mystical.
Yes. That was one of the questions I had, which is what language were some of those songs in? And I imagined maybe it wasn't a language, because I've heard of like what's her name, right, from Gladiator, the that you also recommended recently, the woman that sings the songs in Gladiator. What's her name?
Oh, Lisa Gerard from King
Yes,
Kid
Lisa Gerard.
Dance.
So like that. That is also right. From what I heard,
Yeah,
it's not any
she's also
particular language. She's just talking to
yeah,
God, she says.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's
that's awesome.
amazing, and it's as I said, it's not something new or weird and new age. This is like very old like
Hmm.
tradition of speaking. What it was literally called speaking in tongues,
Yeah.
and it was
Okay.
outlawed and banned by the church at a certain time.
Wow.
Much
Wow.
like most free forms of expression were.
Right.
The
Right.
dark
Right.
ages.
All right. Cool. Well, you have such an amazing story. We could go on. I'm sure. tell us though, what has sound healing, what do you see it provides people, right? As you lead sessions, as you see people dive into sound healing, what do you see provides them? What's like the before and after that you see in them?
Yeah, that's a great question, man, because it seems to be evolving through time, like
Hmm.
when I first started getting into sound healing, um, it was really about, I think, getting people into just like relaxed states, where if the body and the mind are relaxed enough, it really gets you into a state of self-healing because the body
Hmm.
naturally heals when it's relaxed. So that was really the big hype like over a decade ago when I first got in. A lot of people were interested in like self-healing and the deep states of relaxation. But as time has gone on, I've become more just aware of this idea of mysticism, getting into the mystical realms, like realms that are beyond what might be called the more mundane life,
Hmm.
the third dimensional life, like going to work and like, what car do I want to buy, all these kinds of things. But like our relationship to like what some might call the divine or God or goddess, and then within that, having like a kind of spiritual experience, which could be an experience of being unified with all things or feeling like emotions that are beyond the common scope, like emotions like love of the planet or love of all animals.
Hmm.
Um, and when the sounds are being made, they do shift you into this like relaxed state. But then from
Hmm.
there, the music tends to evoke this kind of spiritual consciousness, this kind of mysticism, this connection with a higher sense of the world and
Hmm.
oneself. And as Russell Paul, this great yogi sound teacher, says, because in yoga there's so much emphasis on sound and what they call mantra work.
Hmm.
He said that the world, and I'm paraphrasing him, but he says that basically the world is starving for mysticism, that material culture has created, and I love, this is actually what he said, it's created spiritual claustrophobia. And I
Hmm.
love that idea. If you're living in a city and you're living in this mundane life, there's this constant like constraint around our consciousness. You got to work, you got to do all these things, you got to vote for this person. And, that's why a lot of people are breaking free right now and exploring psychedelics and plant medicines because they're realizing like, my gosh, like it's like vitamin mystical. Like I need mysticism in my life. If I
Hmm.
don't have connection with this like higher beauty. All the great mystic writers, they always talk about there's this like incredible beauty behind the veil of
Hmm.
this kind of material dimension. And when we pierce that veil and we see that beauty is kind of like salvation in a way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I love that. So really provides like two things from what I gathered from what you said, right? At first, just like a deep state of relaxation, which alone could be transformative for people. And I've experienced it myself with you. It really is like, wow. One of the things that I have observed as I've participated in different healing modalities now, including plant medicine, is I think there's an invitation that comes in, which is this is what life could be like,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes when we are in those settings, whether it's sound healing or maybe even during plant medicine, we're so in touch with something within us,
Mm-hmm.
right? That if we go just right back into everyday life and society, we totally left that behind. But perhaps we can get in touch with something in that sound healing session, in that deep state of relaxation, that could that we could continue to nurture even outside of the session, right? The following day, a week later, a month later. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a way, it's like reminds me of what Aldous Huxley, the great writer, said. That a lot of these psychedelics are opening up doors of perception.
Hmm.
But that once you have that perception of a deeper sense of yourself in the world, you don't necessarily need psychedelics.
Hmm.
Um, and in
Right.
some ways, I think when you experience the mystical, the idea is you need to learn how to realize how you can access it yourself,
Hmm.
and create spiritual practices that really enhance that so that it becomes a total and ultimate change of your life, of your sense of reality. And then these things are just used as ways to
Hmm.
enthuse
Exactly.
you.
Exactly.
Um, but the power of music that I find so rich is that there's so many different expressions of music, so many different
Mm.
styles, and every expression of music tends to have a different vibrational medicine. So as much as I'm like a musician, I'm also just like a listener and a lover of music. Like
Mm.
there's, I think it was Nietzsche who said like life without music isn't worth living or something. And I
Right.
definitely feel the same way.
Yeah. I can't even imagine. The
Right.
as I've gone through my own spiritual journey, then I find myself like sharing with people that to me, if I ask myself like, how would we live life like if we didn't have to go to work for money and we didn't have to worry about people being sick, and let's say every single person in the world is provided for, and the earth is in great shape, we're taking care of it, like how would we live life? And to me, the only logical answer is we would be singing and dancing.
A lot more pleasure. A lot
Right.
more pleasure. Absolutely. And pleasure is a huge measure of I think just the goodness of a civilization, like
Hmm.
noble pleasure, like really wholesome pleasure.
Yeah.
It's funny. There's a really great book out there called Sacred Pleasure by Rihanna Eisler, and she's like an amazing alternative historian. Like she looks into like different versions of history that we're not so aware of, and she really shows that there has been a lot of cultures on this planet that really lived in egalitarian, like women and men equal, and they really just focused a lot more on pleasure, like sexual pleasure, sensual pleasure. And if you look at a lot of the West, though, like Western civilization is really rooted in religion, and religions that have really more or less said that suffering is noble,
Mm.
that sacrifice is noble, that like we are originally imperfect, and
Yeah.
thus, suffering is just so deeply it's just this like almost an obsession, almost a violent obsession with suffering, I would
Like
say.
martyrdom.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that needs to be very much balanced now with
Hmm.
the sense that there's been a lot also of spiritual ideas around pleasure and enjoyment and joy and such.
Yeah. When I think about God, I imagine a parent, right? Even in Christian religion, where I grew up, they talk about we are children of God, right? So I imagine how a parent would treat their child. You know,
Right.
um, I'm sure it's not uncommon to feel as I feel that my parents just wanted the best for me. They want me to enjoy my life to the fullest.
Right.
Even when my mom, she's gotten so humble lately, right? She even when I do things that she completely doesn't agree with, she's like, I just want you to be happy, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea of God wants us to suffer for some reason. I'm not sure where we got it. Um, the and then you mentioned the value of getting in touch with that mystical realm. I heard this beautiful story when I went to one of my very first kirtan sessions with this awesome band called the Mystic Mantra Band in South Florida.
Hmm.
Talked about the story of the mist parting, how kirtan is one axis, but there's several axes too, and get in touch with the transcendental realm, the mystical realm, right? And it's like parting the mist, and all of a sudden you see that magical island. So yeah, what you said reminded me of that. It's really beautiful. Um, cool. Let's. You mentioned psychedelics and plant medicine a couple of times. That's really where this podcast was born. Out of
Right.
my first ayahuasca ceremony, I saw that love was our nature, right?
Right.
And really, like, it's the building blocks of this reality. It's what holds it together, and it's what it's made up with. Like, if you could cut into this dimension and see what it's made up, like, you would see love. That was my experience. Like I
Wow.
had an experience of that firsthand, and and it changed my life. So I want to
Certainly
know,
did.
yeah, exactly. So I want to know from you, what was your first experience with plant medicine, and what role has it played in your life? What have you learned the most from it?
Wow. Yeah, that's an interesting question. You got some good questions, brother. I appreciate it. Um, so it's funny, ayahuasca was my first plant medicine. Actually, my only like really, aside from, I regard marijuana as well as a plant
Hmm.
medicine for sure. So in some
Yeah.
ways, and that's a whole other story. But just to relate to you and the origins of this podcast, I wasn't necessarily significantly drawn to actually ayahuasca, but I noticed in the spiritual scene in Toronto, it started to really become popular. Like a lot of people were participating in ayahuasca ceremonies. And if anything, my initial draw to it was more out of curiosity because I had students who were working with me in various capacities who were literally like asking me for my perspective on it. And I had nothing to say because I don't like to speak about things unless really it's about my experience. And I said, I haven't done it, so I don't know what to say. So I came at it one summer just out of curiosity, and it's funny I think a lot of people say this about ayahuasca, when you finally choose to do it, she, as the plant medicine is considered this like feminine spirit, she sort of steps towards you, So like what happened to me was I met this shaman who I felt a very good bond with, and he basically gave me a month to think about it. And within that month, the amount of signs and such and transformations that happened, it felt like there was already some kind of transformative agent that I
Hmm.
invited in my life. So when I first drank ayahuasca, very interestingly, the first thing that happened when, she starts to work on you and you start to see like fractals and you start to really feel like, wow, I'm going into like a hyperspace moment. I'm traveling in a different dimension. It could be really like
Good old
exciting and
hyperspace.
scary. Yeah, it could be good. I think everyone who's drank ayahuasca knows that moment when you realize,
The
okay,
rocket launch.
she's taken over. I remember like she's very instructive, right? She instructs, she teaches, and through your consciousness, you can hear her voice literally. And she basically, the first thing she said to me was, "It's so nice to see you again." That's what she said. So nice to see you again. And
Mm.
she said, "You don't need me. You're already operating at the level that I'm operating at. And that's great because we've worked together in past lives. But it's great to see you again. And we're going to have some fun," basically, is what she said.
Yes.
And it was interesting because I felt incredibly comfortable in
Hmm.
in the experience of her. Like it felt really like, oh yeah, I know this spirit. Like there was a familiarity. And then another interesting thing that happened in that first ceremony was there was a gentleman very close to me who was getting very much in an ordeal. Like he was having that ego death moment that most people
Hmm.
talk about. Fear of death is, as the yogis would say, the ultimate fear. So
Hmm.
ayahuasca is known for taking you into a dance with your fears so you can transmute them. And so
Hmm.
this gentleman was going through a very common experience. People have fear of death. And the shaman was basically containing him, but he wasn't maybe able to like just take him through a process where he was like fully calm. And this went on for about half an hour. And I was actually getting kind of just kind of annoyed because I couldn't focus on
Hmm.
my own journey with this guy here. And there was also like this feeling in me like I need to do something. And of course, I'm like checking my ego because I'm like, this is not my ceremony. I am not an ayahuasca shaman. It's not my place to like do anything. And then my friend who was apprenticing with this shaman, he had crystal bowls and he started to play one of his crystal bowls. And I don't even remember the moment when I willfully decided to do something, but I just started singing at some point. I just remember I started singing. And
Hmm.
this gentleman immediately like looked at me with these kind of shocked eyes. And then he immediately started just like vomiting, like just puking his guts out. And I
Hmm.
had a feeling of, I was singing a very sad song. I remember a very powerful,
Hmm.
sad song. And I remember feeling like my voice was being projected somehow into his body. And none of this was actually, again, I didn't, it was felt like the medicine herself was like just using me as a tool. And the next day, this gentleman came up to me and said, like, who are you? What were you doing? Like your voice went into my stomach, literally started pulling all this stuff out.
Wow.
And so that was very remarkable for me to just be in a space of like, wow, I was actually in a place of not only taking the medicine, but I was really working with others with the medicine. So that was quite, remarkable. And the shaman was flexible and humble enough, I think, to recognize that I was sort of doing this and didn't, he just allowed it. So it was beneficial for this man. So that was really great. And yeah,
how long ago was that?
That was, gosh, I can't remember now, man. That was almost 10 years ago, I would say. Yeah.
Okay. You had just gotten into sound healing, right? So,
well, maybe it was 8 years ago because I was fairly into sound healing at that point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was fairly.
Yeah. How appropriate, like I can only imagine the power of both of those medicines combined,
Well, it was funny after that too, because I started getting a lot of people sort of saying, you should start playing your music for ayahuasca experiences. I started to in small doses, but there was people also saying you should train to be on this medicine path. I have so much reverence for ayahuasca shamans because I see how committed they are. It's literally their whole life. It's just a surrendering to aiding this beautiful plant medicine spirit. And I just knew that wasn't for this lifetime, my commitment. While I was also just like thankful that maybe I've danced with her in the past.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Great. And one of the things that I know you're passionate about is men's work. And you've talked about, I've heard you talk about how, and actually the last podcast I did with Tanai when I was a guest in her podcast, we talked about how, with men in our Western society, there's this like stigma or norm around like, men are tough, like men don't cry, right? And all that stuff. And that's something I don't know too much about when it comes to you and your work. How are you involved with men's work? What do you do?
Yeah. So, I'll take you back to similarly to the sound healing, like how it began is very interesting. So back in, I think it was 2012, I was traveling in India in the fall for 2 months. And I befriended this amazing guy there, this Portuguese guy. We became very fast friends. And he had just finished, I think, reading this book called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And he just told me, Darren, you need to get, he called it a technology. He said, you need to get the technology of this book in your life. Like this was given to me by some very wise, he described them as wise witches in a noble sense, like wise women in his life. And they said to him that every man needs to read this book. And, I was already an awakened being in the sense at that point in my life that I knew when wise women tell you to do something, you do it.
Yeah.
Like women are really so much the caretakers of wisdom in our world. That's a whole other topic. But basically, I went home and this man's name was Darren. He said, the reason this book is important is it's going to teach you how to work with your masculinity. And up to that point, I think for most men, when they first come into contact with like developing themselves, they often think, man, I've got to develop my feminine side, my feeling nature, my sensitivity. And, this toxic masculinity thing is a problem. And they shirk their masculine to the side usually. And that's what I was doing, at least at the time. So to work on my masculinity seemed kind of alien to me. But when I started reading this book, it was like finding that vitamin in your diet that you've just been missing, for your whole life. And the minute I started reading, it was like a tonic. My soul started to strengthen. I started to develop and improve like never before. And what the book is based on is archetypal psychology. So eventually I started to get so impacted by this book that I created a men's group with another fellow in Toronto that we ran for about 2 years. And then we both splintered off and I wandered off and did my own men's circle, which I was holding for years. And then I eventually developed a course based on what this book is about. And what it's about is archetypal psychology is one of the oldest forms of psychology on the planet. It literally means the archetypes are kind of like these hard wired aspects of the human being in forms of character that are very common to all. So, for example, I like to use a metaphor of like if you have a crystal and you shine like a beam of light into the crystal, when the light comes out the other side, it'll usually come out in a diverse amount of colors of the rainbow. So it's like that. It's like consciousness moves into the human being, and it usually expresses itself through these common characteristics. So, for example, Carl Jung, the great psychologist, saw these 4 masculine archetypes of the king, the warrior, the magician, or you could say the shaman, and the lover. And these aspects work in all of us. And so what this book was giving was a map for you to read. Where do you have strengths in these aspects, and where do you have weaknesses, what we call the shadow work? And typically it forms a pyramid structure. So when you're in the fullness of the archetype, you're expressing the great king energy and health. You know, you're blessing everyone, you're generous, you're really seeing yourself as a role of like stewarding the sacred order down from these higher dimensional realms into the earth. But when you fall into the shadow, you go into this like bipolar expression of too much or excess of the archetype, which would be the tyrant king, or too deficient, which would be the weakling king. And what's great is you read all these archetypes, you start to see that it's like a map to show you where you're out of balance and pointing you in the direction of where you can come to more expression. So I developed this course called Heroic Consciousness, this 4-week course where I take men through each archetype. I give them homework, embodiment exercises so they can really bring that onto themselves. And I'll be launching it later this year as an online course and starting up an online men's work around it as well.
That's
and
amazing.
we started a men's group here in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica as well, just because I've just realized wherever you are, just having a group where men can come together, whether it's once a week or every 2 weeks, just to talk about feelings, which is a very important subject. So a lot of men are not trained to be emotionally open. And a lot of women, especially in heterosexual contexts where they're getting very close in intimacy, they're really starving for men to be, more honest about their emotions.
Yes.
Because that's really like the foundation for trust and intimacy to take place.
Definitely. Even myself, with all the personal development I had done, I thought I was great at being vulnerable, right? But in episode 3 and 4 of this podcast, I actually shared how I had this huge discovery as to like, oh wow, like it's actually one thing to share vulnerable things. It's another thing to be vulnerable,
right.
and to share vulnerably, right? And yeah, I saw how out of touch I was with my heart and my feelings. Right? I was relying so much on my logic and my intellect and my reason, right? And that's one thing I've been learning. It's almost like it's like this duality, right? Like the logic is the masculine, the masculine energy, and then the feeling and the emotion is the feminine, and we have both of those in us, wouldn't you say? And then the balance is the having the keys to the kingdom, so to speak, is to have the balance of the two. Would you say something like that?
100%. I mean, this is very old wisdom that I think we've known as a species for a long time. I mean, I love, one of my favorite symbols is the yin yang symbol in ancient Taoism, because it shows you that everyone's a blend of these opposites, and they're complementary opposites. There's a dot of each in the other. They're generating each other in a way. They're not polarized, and whereas the West, we would really see things as like you'd have a straight line in between, and they're really like, there's like a disconnect happening.
Right.
So everyone has a feminine and a masculine aspect within them. And it just tends to be, I mean, I know gender theory is quite an interesting thing that's being explored right now, But there tends to be biologically more of a proclivity in men or male-bodied people that they're going to have more yang energy, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then with women, they will have more yin. So we're kind of like knowing more about yang than women in a sense. And then the goal of life is to make this kind of balance happen within, you know, and that's why the genders kind of meet each other in a way. We get to learn. There's an allure to learn from the other in that sense, and to help and support, you know, men to like grow their feminine, so they can come into that balance with the masculine, and for women too to do that work as well. And that's really exciting, especially when people take it into like an intimate partnership. There's a lot of all of a sudden like, wow, this contextualizes the relationship in a different way, because there's a mutual learning and giving and receiving that can happen on a very deep energetic level.
Yes. One of the things I want to ask you, since we're kind of straight off a bit, I wanted to go back to the point that you were talking about the archetypes. What is it to fall into the shadows?
Yeah, so the shadow is sort of seen as those parts of ourselves that are very unconscious, aspects of ourselves that are more reactionary rather than responsive, you know. So a reaction is when an emotion comes up that just possesses you so quickly that you can't even think clearly. You're just kind of like reacting to something. And usually those reactions are based on triggers of pain that was caused to you when, in most indications, when you were a child, you know, when you were very young and very sensitive, and you took these hits somewhere that are creating these echoes throughout your life. So the shadow is basically saying that there's these aspects of ourselves that are kind of in the dark, there's not really a light being shed upon them. And the whole goal of life, according to Jung, who, you know, is the modern sort of, I don't want to say the creative archetypal theory, because in a lot of ways he was just like bringing and revising something from the past to modern culture that had been lost in some ways. But the idea is that we want to bring light to these shadow aspects and integrate them. The idea is they're kind of fragmented off from us, and we want to integrate them into ourselves and bring them back into this greater splendor of light, which we become more of like what Jung called the great self, which is the fully healed and integrated self. So that no longer are we triggered by these things, no longer are we acting unconsciously. We're conscious to our drives and our motivations, and we're embracing them. You know, we're not necessarily like spiritually bypassing them or trying to cut ourselves off from these aspects. But, you know, I think the concept of the shadow is also like, there's parts of it that I'm still trying to wrap my head around, you know, because I think in the West, we're so bridled to this polarization that the whole notion of like, well, what do we do with the shadow? Like, is it all about just integrating and moving dark into light? Like, because if I look at the yin yang symbol, the light and the dark, it's not like you're getting rid of the dark. It's like they're supposed to dance with each other. And it's almost like that symbol is almost saying that there's a point where you can bring them into this kind of dynamic balance, where they're kind of working together for this greater, you know, purpose. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. I shared on social media recently. I mean, again, going back to being in nature, right? Of the most exciting thing there is to do here in Potrero, Costa Rica, where I'm staying, is go watch the sunset. Right. So I watch it pretty much every day, and I watch the complete daylight slowly fade into nighttime. Right. And I was so inspired by it. I was like, wow, like the sun so generously and graciously bows out and gives way to the night, gives space to the night in this perfect balance where if you're not watching, you'll miss it. You'll be like, oh, wow, it's dark now. Like you'd think it was in a snap, but no, it's like this 45-minute dance transition, right, from light to dark. And that's been that's been a big journey for me, is to give space to learn to give space to these aspects of myself that before I was either too embarrassed about or ashamed about, or just thought they weren't good enough, right? And one thing that's made a difference is actually sharing those things with people. Like the moment I put it out there in the world, in the universe, and other people's hearing, right? All of a sudden, it's not something that I'm keeping hidden anymore. And then what you go to find out is like, oh wow, that's actually a very human thing.
Right.
It turns out I'm not the only one that has that experience. I always think that I'm very special. Like I'm the only one that deals with this, you know.
Right.
So yeah, the aspect of shadow work and the way that you described it, that it was so beautiful.
Well, I also want to just add, like, I
Yeah.
think we're actually in a moment in our species, like just to zoom out from like the personal to the impersonal. I think our whole species right now is going through like a collective initiation into deep shadow work. Like, I think if
Yes.
you just look at like everything that's happening geopolitically in the world, and since the internet, I mean, I grew up. I'm the generation where I was a teenager when the internet like first happened. You know, like
Yeah.
I still remember what the world was like without the internet.
Right.
You know? And I mean, it was the greatest change I think that's happened in, you could say, human history in a way. I mean, there's not many other technologies that have come around that have done what the internet did. You know, it just
Right.
brought the whole world into interconnection. Like it
Yeah.
really brought this ability to communicate across wires, like just so profound.
Like what we're doing now.
What we're doing now. It was
Yeah.
so profound. And what's amazing is that what that is doing is creating this ability for us as a species to really look at ourselves, you know, not just as a race, not just as a culture, but as a species. And I think it's very good, because what's happening is we're becoming aware of our shadow collectively that we all hold. You know, like the environmental crisis is a perfect example. Like, how did we get so out of the light, you know, that we're acting in such an unconscious way that we'd be destroying the home that is the planet that we live on? Like, what happened there? And then, as you say, it's about like, we need to share, you know, the reasons to bring this like shadow out into the light so it can be understood. And that's the gift of the shadow, is that the gift of the shadow is that there's just this untapped potential there to understand. You know, it's like the wound turns into wisdom when you start to heal it. And this is where this is something that I think throws a lot of our Western minds for a loop, because we're so used to like seeing like these lines between things, but like really nature's working in a very much like a spiral cycle flow state of alchemy. So like your shadow becomes your light. You know, the shadow is almost like the black oil that's fueling the fire. You know, it's like they're all feeding each other.
Yeah.
And then on a certain way, you know, the fire is going to melt things that may become that black oil at a certain point. So they're just like constantly being churned. You know, it's like very this is why I love the some of the Native American tribes, you know, because they call God like the great mystery. And I think that's like a little more accurate.
It's appropriate. Yeah.
You know, because it's just like points with reality where it's just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like the holy, I don't know. You know,
I tend to be a little bit suspect with anybody that says, I have the truth. I know exactly.
Oh, yeah,
I know exactly how God works, who God is, right?
Yeah.
How could you possibly? Well, and the time that we have left, which isn't much, just based on what you're talking now, reminded me of something that you said that I did want to ask you about. That you said at the end of the session that you led. So many times I hear people say when they're closing whatever they're leading, the light in me honors the light in you.
Right.
You said the light and the dark in me honors the light and the dark in you. That's one of the most beautiful things I ever heard. Right.
Thanks,
so,
man. Well, it just made sense. It just, I can't remember when I started saying it. I think it maybe even been another yoga teacher friend who inspired that in me. I can't remember if it was something that I innovated, but either way, it's a beautiful expression, right? Because you're just honoring those two parts of yourself, because it does get too much about the light in a lot of
yes.
Like I don't like the term light worker, to be honest, and
Right.
because it just feels like, okay,
Mm. You're
I'd
neglecting the other side, you know?
I'd rather say light worker, dark dancer. I don't know if that's like too
Right.
much of a mouthful, but it
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
brings that aspect
Cool.
in, you know.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we didn't miss that little nugget. Um, two quick questions. You can answer them in a few sentences. What are you most passionate about?
Wow. I think I'm most passionate about just like the enlightenment of our species right now. I just feel
Mm,
there's such an opportunity with all the wisdom that is in the world that is being shared that we truly have a chance right now to take a giant leap, like a giant evolutionary leap. And I'm
mm,
super passionate in my lifetime just to give as much as I can
mm,
to that, to restoring in some ways, because I believe there has been this kind of spiritual culture living on our planet previously, but just, yeah, to building a kind of what people are calling a new earth, you know.
yeah.
Um, I feel that we're all alive in a time of great turning, of great shifting,
Hmm.
and I'm super excited to just share and participate and ennoble that as I can.
It's amazing. Yeah, and that probably starts to answer the other question I had for you, which is if you could accomplish one thing that you haven't accomplished yet before you leave the earth, what
Mm.
would that one thing be?
Well, I think it would be starting this Gaia awakening, modern sort of styled mystery school.
You said Guy or Gaia?
Gaia, Gaia
Gaia.
Mystery School.
Hmm.
So that's sort of been something I've been developing for almost 10 years now, this idea of creating a spiritual school.
Mm,
Um, but it's becoming more focused into the eco spiritual, like,
mm,
which is what I think indigenous wisdom encapsulates, like looking at environmentalism through a spiritual lens and the spiritual means. So it's something that I'm hoping to launch actually this year as an online school, Gaia
mm,
Awakening, in April. In fact, on Earth Day, that's our kind of soft launch date.
mm,
And same date, I'll be launching the online companion journey for the album.
mm,
And then I'm in Costa Rica right now with you, living
mm,
here, and I'm looking for, some land that would want to steward this vision with me. So
mm.
it will be a physical location. That's what I would hope to accomplish. If I was going to be my last wish, that's something I'd want to leave as well behind me, is
Hmm.
a school that can help enlighten humanity and heal our broken relationship with the earth.
Mm. That's amazing.
Mm.
And and what I admire about you is like you're well on your way to fulfill
I hope so.
on that
Yeah,
kind of
that's
thing,
the
you know.
plan.
Um, so Darren, just thank you so much again for jumping by and being here. You know, the one thing the one word that comes to mind when I think about you, especially having heard your entire double album, is reverence. You know, so
I
thank you
love
for your
that.
reverence
Yeah,
for
thank you.
the earth, towards Gaia, towards the body that you refer to as the body of God, right? And I love how you talk about like we're walking on the breasts of this goddess with our
Yes.
feet, right?
Yes.
And that just really brought to me this sense of reverence, like inspired me to be reverent, like with every step that I take.
Mm.
So thank you for your reverence towards Gaia. Thank you for your reverence towards the feminine. Like you're doing like just amazing work. Thank you for sharing your truth and your journey with us and your wisdom. Please tell people how they can stay in touch with you, learn more about you, learn more about your offerings.
Thanks, brother. That means a lot. All those beautiful words you shared. Yeah, I mean, Instagram, Darren Druid. You can find my music on Spotify. That's
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of people find music these days. But I also have a Bandcamp page, which is kind of an iTunes for musicians, gives them more revenue. And all of my music is there. Like there's some
Mm.
stuff that's not on Spotify. And then my website is darrenaustinhall.com. And I have a newsletter called Guy Awakening that I've been putting out. It's changed names throughout the years, but it's now called Guy Awakening as we're prepping to launch the online school very soon. So you can go onto my website and find the link to get onto my newsletter as well. I usually send out 2 a month with a little article and all the updates because I'm always putting out different things. I DJ ecstatic dances as well. So I always put my DJ sets up on my SoundCloud, another place to find me. So yeah, lots of different dimensions there.
All of it. Amazing. All right, Darren. Well, with that, we're going to close up. Thank you for being here. Is there any last words that you have for our listeners?
I would just say, be glorious.
All right. Well, there you have it, everyone. The one and only Darren Austin Hall. Go to Bandcamp, go to Spotify, go to YouTube. I've just started watching those videos. They're amazing. Some real professional work. And just thank you, Darren, for blessing us with your presence, your gifts, everything. I'm a big fan. And I love the friendship that we got to develop. Such a young friendship, but developed to be such a deep friendship, I feel.
Yes.
So there'll be a lot more to come.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me, Caesar. Love is our nature. Indeed.
That's right. That's right. All right. You're welcome. Goodbye, everybody. Enjoy your day, your night, the rest of your week, and go walk with reverence. Bye-bye.
See you.
That is all, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you for being a valued listener. If you haven't already, remember to subscribe to the podcast in whatever your favorite platform is. You can also watch the video version of the episode on the Love is Our Nature YouTube channel. Check out loveisOurNature.com as well. That's where you can see our latest news and most recent content. If you enjoyed the episode, leave a review, share it with your friends, or email me. I love hearing what you took away for yourself out of listening. My email is caesar@loveIsOurNature.com. That's CESAR, or Cesar, like my mother says it, at loveIsOurNature.com altogether. Till next time, I'll be here rooting for you. And remember, whatever the question, love is the answer.